my feet are very planted in today, in now. My stuff has never, I've never wanted to presume that there's anything in the area of prophecy culturally about what I do. What's more about antennae than it is about actually understanding a situation.
She'll come, she'll go, she'll lay a leaf on you, skin sweet with musky oil, the lady from another grinning soul. Cologne she wears, silver and America. She'll drive the beetle car and beat you down at Colcanasta. And when the clothes are strewn, don't be afraid of the room. Touch the fullness of her breast, feel the love of her caress. She will be your living end. She'll come, she'll go, she'll lay the leaf on you, but she won't stake her life on you. How can life become her point of view? And when the clothes are strewn, don't be afraid of the room. Touch the fullness of her breast, feel the love of her caress. She will be your living end. 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 She will be
I think there's a possibility that one could put a lot of really kind of uncommercial abstract music and make it accessible to people who wanted to download it. That's kind of what I want to do in the future, and I will do, I think.
Speaking of non-commercial, as you get older, does it matter to you less if your albums sell, or is that still?
I seem to have a core audience who've sort of kept me above water all these years, but I'm not a big album seller. I never have been. I think what I contributed to music and sort of what I did to how rock can look probably has been my contribution, more than, say, Foreigner, who sell, at their peak, were selling millions and millions of albums. I'm not a million, you know, about the same kind of sales as Dylan. You know, neither of us are album sellers. But over a period of time, That's not entirely true, because over 20 years the albums sell an extraordinary amount. But they're not, I think maybe I'm not so known for immediacy in the albums. Often they take quite some time to get into. They're not sort of happy little jingles that are top of the pops, you know.
Just one more question about the net. What do you see as the potential for that? I mean,
In which way? In what way?
People always seem to be curious about what its uses are, other than connecting people, which is not necessarily a good thing in
The uses of the net, blackmail and sex, I think, predominantly.
Definitely seems to be. Did you get any satisfaction out of releasing it on the net? You did because people could...
It's all right. It's just another tool. I'm not wildly excited about it. I mean, it's not... I don't lose sleep over it. I mean, it's all right. It's just there's, like a typewriter. It doesn't impress me that much. I much prefer the programs that you can buy for the computer, and I like making art on the computer. I like fooling around with Photoshop and Kid Pics and Painter and things like that, and constructing my own works. But just to eavesdrop on other people's conversations or whatever doesn't really fascinate that much. But of course, when we're on tour and we have all those dreadful hours waiting between shows, we spend half the time getting comments on the last night's show, which sort of appear immediately, which is actually very instructive. And keep those messages coming in, because it really helps to define where the interaction is between ourselves and our audience. So I like that aspect of it. Immediate feedback is great on the net.
And there, it was in the bio, something about giving a more spiritual vibe to the album, and the song 7 Years in Tibet. I know you've been interested in Buddhism, and we're starting to see maybe a resurgence of that. I mean, we've got Adam Yauch of the Beastie Boys.
Yes.
We've got Free Tibet festivals going on.
Yeah.
A lot of Hinduism and Indian music is starting to come up. Kula Shaker and Eddie Vedder's and that. Can you describe your own interest in it?
Well, I'm a closet. I don't know if I'm a closet shaman or a closet holy man. When I was about 18, I studied Tibetan Buddhism for about 2 or 3 years, and I had a teacher called Chimi Yangdang Rinpoche, who had just come over from Tibet and led his own followers over. The majority of them, sadly, were shot by the Chinese as they made their exit from Tibet down into India. He started off, I think, something like 2,000 followers, and ended up with 50 or 60, because the helicopters would come out there and shoot them off, like shooting deer or something. But he fortunately came through, and he really sort of tried to guide me into some kind of informed opinion about Buddhism. I wouldn't say that I was a very good Buddhist, but he eventually told me to exert myself in music and not run off and get my hair cut off and become a lama.
What is a good Buddhist?
What?
What is a good Buddhist? What makes one good?
A good Buddhist? Well, somebody that even tries. But the one thing that he left me with was a sense of transience and change, which actually became fundamentals to my life, my approach to it, and not holding on to anything, not considering that there is anything that will last through one's entire eternal life, living or dead. And it makes letting go very easy. Material things or physical things. And looking for the source of one's own being becomes much more important. And I guess that's been sort of my own personal journey, is trying to sort out where my spiritual bounty lies, where my thread to a universal order lies, and that can become a life search. And I think that's, as a writer, probably what I involve myself in more than anything else. And but coming back to the Tibet thing, I think watching over the last couple of years how vocal and articulate the Dalai Lama has been, informing and educating people what's happened in Tibet and what's at stake, has sort of prompted my guilt to a certain extent, that I had such a strong interest in Tibet when I was young, and it seems to have dissipated or been relinquished somehow over the years, that it prompted me into writing something about that particular situation. And in fact, we just did the other day in Toronto a recording for an album which will be the funds of which will go towards the Tibetan refugees. And we wrote and recorded a little song the other day. I think that album comes out about 6 weeks' time, I think.
There was a wonderful story I read somewhere about you going to Kyoto and someone telling you that something about organized religion is of the past and that the spiritualism is going to come through people like you.
Well, I'm not sure that he quite meant people like me, but I think he felt. Yes, it was a Zen teacher at a temple that I like a lot in Kyoto, and he's not often there. I usually see the sort of a lot of the other masters who are there, but we were fortunate enough to have lunch with them last time we were there, and it was most peculiar. Out of nowhere, he suddenly said, "Religion is over, and it lies in the arts. That the information and spiritual life will be in the vessel of the visual and the musical arts," which I thought was quite a stunning comment from this 70-year-old Zen master. I'm not sure that I have his optimism.
I actually sort of do. I sort of feel
You do?
that way. I think less and less people, at least in my life, are involved in organized religion. I mean, even
I agree with that. I agree with you there, absolutely. I think people are letting go of the idea of organized. I can't remember who the philosopher was, but in the early part of the century, he said that we have to kill God to reinvent Him. And I think that is very much playing itself out in the later part of this century. I think we have to find the focus of where our religious strength lies in an entirely different area from the archaic and almost medieval forms that we're sort of expected to supplant ourselves to. Yeah.
I think the beauty of it may lie in that it comes from within the power is within everyone, rather than in the old structure. It was like the power lies in the priest or the rabbi, or the power figure, in re-empowering everyone. And I think popular culture can help that in a weird way.
Yeah, I agree there, but I think we're finding the materials of a new religion, but I think we have to find and develop a new kind of discipline. I think there is no real sense of purpose without a shaping of fragments. I think we have the fragments and the pieces of a new way, a new way. But I think we have to construct a path out of those pieces. I think we have the bits of concrete, and it's merely crazy paving at the moment. But we have to develop a form. Presumably, that's what we'll be doing in our new millennium: is developing the form. We have the material.
I think we're getting the wrap soon. Just one last question. Aliens have saturated our culture, whether it's just little blips on people's sweatshirts, backpacks, stories, stories of abduction. What's your take on that? Do you have an opinion? Are they real, or is it some cultural phenomenon?
I feel like a traitor, but I'm sort of indifferent to it. It's for me that it only ever represented spiritual search. I mean, I'm not madly obsessed about the thing. In terms of hardware, science fiction hardware, I tend to have just used the idea of the alien or the otherness of beings as to pinpoint a sense of isolation or alienation, which is slightly, sort of more of a psychological thing, and they became ciphers for that more. But the idea, is the life on Mars. I could care less.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. What it comes down to is that my interpretation of my work is really immaterial. I mean, I'm not really a believer in art and music being institutionalized or put in galleries and stuff like that. I think art is something for the use of a public. It's for the public to interpret it and use it almost like a sustenance to life. So it's the interpretation of the listener
or the viewer, which is all important. Authorship is in question now.
Hello, space boy.
What Brian and I found that we were doing initially in March of '94, when we were looking for grist for the mill, is dealing with all the subjects that interested us at that time. For my part, it was things like the re-emergence of neo-paganism and ritual body art and fragmentation of society, which is an ongoing thing that I've never moved away from. That plus the odd lyric that I'd been writing over the last few months. And all these things sort of became the fodder for what we were doing. And once we started actually evolving the piece, we realized that we had formed some kind of narrative, loose, very loose, non-linear narrative with this small cast of characters. And there was a thread of a story that kept running into conflicts, like real life. There were no tidy endings, no tidy beginnings, and the whole thing was very messy. And we thought, well, that's as it should be, let's not clean it up. But it did give us the impression that this was an open-ended vehicle, that it would be, what a great thing it would be to keep working on these things right the way through to the end of the century and have more or less a kind of a diary ourselves in music and texture of what it felt like to be around at the end of the millennium. It would be so, wow, I mean, what an accomplishment, you know? And let's do it before anybody else does.
By virtue of the fact that I'm getting older, has given me quite a scope on what I can draw from within my own catalogue of albums. I can take things from albums that I did 15, 20 years ago, and taking something from, say, the 70s and putting it into the 90s. It's almost like the albums that I've done have become the palette that I can draw from. Each album is kind of a different colour, you know. I don't really have to go much to the outside at all for influence or a new inventive way of doing something. I just kind of look at my own stuff and utilise what I've done already, you know. It's there to be used.
There's a similarity in the sense of there's a kind of angst that was in the late 70s albums. There's the dysfunctional city from Diamond Dogs makes a kind of an appearance. There's the mythical beast in the character of the Diamond Dog, but which is now reformed as the Minotaur. These set, almost signature things that I've written about over the years that are recontextualized now that they're put into this current piece that I've done with Brian. It's kind of exciting getting them all to where they're all speaking different languages. It's like these people have been away and they come back and they're Italian or something. Not Italian, but actually in this case they're from New Jersey. New Jersey. When I was doing the characters in the early 70s, I think it was there was some problem for me about whether they were stage characters or recreating aspects of my life and taking it on stage, or whether the thing was evolving on stage and I was then pulling it back into real life. And now I think what I'm doing probably to protect my own sanity is that, in a way, it's a precaution, I guess. Instead of inventing just one character, I've invented about 7 or 8, and I think it enables me to retain the guise of an author, but at least I don't identify with them. They sort of remain plastic, malleable creations that I can probably go with and take somewhere else on further albums. So there's a sense of distance now, and I like being in the situation of, you know, writer, author. I think that's probably I'm more comfortable there than actually inventing and being any of the characters that I create.
Stay away from the future, back away from the past. It's all to blame.
Even though there's a very strong narrative and characters in this new piece, Outside, it really isn't what the album's about. The album is about atmosphere. It's about the sound of 1995. The narrative and the characters are really a kind of a skeleton. The content of the album is what's put on that skeleton, which is the musical texture. That's the flesh and the blood. I don't think there's ever really been a time in the last 25 years making music and writing music that I haven't also painted. If I have any kind of a problem with the context of something, or if I come to a block and I can't go forwards anymore, I'll often revert back to the other medium. So often if the music side of things is bogged down, that I've got to this kind of impasse, then I'll go and paint it. You don't come to the end of a painting, you come to a point where you know you have to stop. And I think the great artists know where to stop, and those of us that are kind of tagging on behind, kind of, sometimes we go just a bit too far and you destroy the whole thing. We don't do quite enough and it's a bit weak. That's what it's like being a visual artist. Because it was pretty much an experiment in its own way, in its own nature, I think a Tin Machine probably embodies some of the best and some of the worst. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. So of the work that I've done over the last 10 years anyway, it had extraordinary high points and some real downers. Which comes with the territory of experimentation. Not all of it works, but when it does work, it works really well. And again, it's the thing that Brian always uses when I get a bit timid about the work that I'm doing. He says, don't forget that in music, you can crash your plane and walk away from it. That art really isn't that full of life-threatening situations. What Brian brings to a situation is a very sophisticated sense of analysis. He can look at something and gauge its import. He can examine a piece of music and find its real strengths and also its weaknesses, and he'll tend to frame a little piece in the middle and say that 10 minutes is really interesting, but the songs either side are a waste of time and nothing's happening there. But his conceptual abilities, when he brings those into a work situation, are really a help to the creative aspects of what you're doing. A small, mobile, highly intelligent unit in a tweed jacket.
Over with his deeply felt grace.
Constant reinvention.
Of sorts, yeah.
Why do you do that?
I think I was quite happy to buy into the idea of reinvention up until the beginning of the 80s, really. And it came about, I think, more than anything else, that when I was a teenager, I had it in my mind that I would be a creator of musicals. I sincerely wanted to write musicals. For the West End, for Broadway, whatever. I didn't see much further than that. As a writer, and I really had the idea in my head that people would do my songs. And I was not a natural performer. I didn't feel at ease on stage, ever. And I had created this one character, Ziggy Stardust, that it seemed that I would be the one that would play him because nobody else was doing my songs, and the chances of my actually getting a musical mounted were very slim. And so I became Ziggy Stardust for that period, whatever. And things sort of led. I liked the idea, and I felt really comfortable going on stage as somebody else. And it seemed a rational decision to keep on doing that. And so I got quite besotted with the idea of just creating character after character. And I think probably there must have been a point in the late 70s, well, I know there was, where I felt that the characters were in fact getting in the way of myself as a writer, and I endeavoured to kind of kill them off and start writing for me as just a singer-songwriter. I'm not sure if I was ever successful in that, because I do take a degree of theatricality when I go on stage all the time. That's how I deal with the stage situation. I'm still not comfortable on stage.
But I mean, David Bowie himself is an invention. I mean, do you think of yourself as Bowie or David Jones, the boy from South London?
Less and less as Bowie.
How are we supposed
I don't
to
even know
pronounce
how
it?
to pronounce it anymore. I've lost track. I always thought it was Bowie. I thought, well, it's a Scottish name, must be Bowie. But nobody in Scotland pronounces it like that. Pronounce it Bowie, I think.
Now Ziggy played guitar, jamming good with weird and the spiders from Mars, where they played at left hand.
It was some kind of discovery in the 80s, I think, that a lot of what I am is my enthusiasms. That I've always been a very curious and enthusiastic person, again, as from when I was a teenager, and that it really wasn't up to me to try and identify exactly what that meant. I just had to accept that I was a person that had a very short attention span, would move from one thing to another quite rapidly when I got bored with the other. I became comfortable with that and didn't try and identify myself or try and ask myself who I was. The less questioning I did about myself as to who I was, the more comfortable I felt.
But
so now I have absolutely no knowledge of who I am, but I'm extremely happy.
But do you find the business of being in the music industry as interesting and attractive as it is?
I have nothing to do with the industry. I really have so little to do with it. The hub of my creativity comes from what I do and where I go. I put myself in places, one that maybe I've never been before, or that I feel there's a certain tension involved. I can't really write or produce much if I'm in a place that's relaxing. I have to have a set of conflicts going around me, not necessarily of my own doing. I've learned that is a particularly bad idea.
What do you mean?
So, well, I don't create my own conflicts in my own life. I think I might have done that to quite an extent when I was younger. Is actually things were going too smoothly, I would be drawn, because being an addictive personality, I would be drawn to create conflicts that would produce the tension necessary to write. Now I find that I can do it by observation more than being deeply involved in a mess to be able to write. Yeah. But the industry side of things, I'm not even sure what that word actually represents to me anymore.
I mean, at a personal level, you don't do drugs anymore.
No, absolutely not.
And you don't drink?
I don't drink either, no.
Not even a glass of wine or anything?
No, it would kill me if I
started.
What do you
mean it would kill you?
I'm an alcoholic, so it would be a kiss of death for me to start drinking again. And my relationships with my friends, my family, everybody around me are so good and have been for so many years now. I wouldn't do anything to destroy that again. You know, it's very hard to have relationships when you're doing drugs and drinking. For me personally, anyway. You become closed off, unreceptive, insensitive, all the dreadful things that you've heard every other pop singer ever say. And I was very lucky that I found my way out of that. It's been good for me. I've reassessed my life.
Now, did I read somewhere that you said if you were 19, you wouldn't go into the music business?
I think that's probably quite right. I think I'd probably just be a fan and a collector of records.
What would you do?
I wanted to be a musician because it seemed rebellious. It seemed subversive. It felt like one could affect change to a form. it was very hard to hear music when I was younger, you know. When I was really young, you had to tune into AFN radio to hear the American records. There was no MTV, and it wasn't sort of wall-to-wall blanket music. And so therefore it had a kind of a call to arms kind of feeling to it. Is that this is the thing that will change things. This is a dead, dodgy occupation to have. It's still, produced signs of horror from people if you said, yeah, I'm in rock and roll. It was, my goodness. Now it's a career opportunity. And the internet is now, carries the flag of being subversive and possibly rebellious and chaotic, nihilistic, and oh yes it is. Forget about the Microsoft element. The monopolies do not have a monopoly, maybe on programs.
What you like about the what you like about it is the fact that anyone can say anything or do anything.
From my stand, from where I am, because of by virtue of the fact that I am a pop singer and writer, I really embrace the idea that there's a new demystification process going on between the artist and the audience. I think when you look back at, say, this last decade, there hasn't really been one single entity, artist or group, that have personified or become the brand name for the 90s. It was starting to fade a little in the 80s, and in the 70s there were still definite artists, in the 60s there were the Beatles and the Hendrix, and in the 50s there was Presley. Now it's subgroups and genres. It's hip-hop, it's girl power, it's a communal kind of thing. It's about the community. It's becoming more and more about the audience, because the point of having somebody who led the forces has disappeared, because the vocabulary of rock is too well known. It's a currency that is not, it's not devoid of meaning anymore, but it's certainly only a conveyor of information now. It's not a conveyor of rebellion. And the internet has taken on that, as I say. And so I find that a terribly exciting area. So from my standpoint, being an artist, I like to see what the new construction is between artist and audience. There is a breakdown. There's personified, I think, by the rave culture of the last few years, where the audience is at least as important as whoever is playing at the rave. It's almost like the artist is to accompany the audience and what the audience are doing. And that feeling is very much permeating music and permeating the internet.
But what is it specifically about the internet? I mean, anybody can say anything. And it all adds up to what? I mean, it seems to me there's nothing cohesive about it in the way that there was something cohesive about the youth revolution in music.
Oh, but absolutely. And because I think that we, at the time, up until at least the mid-70s, really felt that we were still living under the, in the guise of a single and absolute created society, where there were known truths and known lies, and there was no kind of duplicity or pluralism about the things that we believed in. That started to break down rapidly in the 70s, and the idea of a duality in the way that we live. There are always 2, 3, 4, 5 sides to every question. That the singularity disappeared. And that, I believe, has produced such a medium as the internet, which absolutely establishes and shows us that we are living in total fragmentation.
You don't think that some of the claims being made for it are hugely exaggerated? I mean, when the telephone was invented, people made amazing claims.
I know, the president,
for example.
The president at the time, when it was first invented, he was outrageous. He said he foresaw the day in the future when every town in America would have a telephone. Now how dare he claim like that? Absolute bullshit. No, you see, I don't agree. I think the internet, I don't think we've even seen the tip of the iceberg. I think the potential of what the internet is going to do to society, both good and bad, is unimaginable. I think we're actually on the cusp of something exhilarating and terrifying.
It's just a tool, though, isn't it?
No, it's not. No, it's an alien life form.
What do you think, I mean, when you think then about the
Is
future
there life on Mars? Yes, it's just landed here.
But it's simply a different delivery system there. You're arguing about something more profound.
Oh yeah, I'm talking about the actual context, and the state of content is going to be so different to anything that we can really envisage at the moment, where the interplay between the user and the provider will be so in simpatico, it's going to crush our ideas of what mediums are all about. But it's happening in every form. It's happening in visual art. The breakthroughs at the early part of the century with people like Duchamp, who were so prescient in what they were doing and putting down. The idea that the piece of work is not finished until the audience come to it and add their own interpretation, and what the piece of art is about is the grey space in the middle. That grey space in the middle is what the 21st century is going to be about.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Marion. Thank you, everybody.
you.